The wind knifed through the narrow canyon, carrying the metallic scent of blood long before Ethan Cole saw the first smear of crimson on the rocks. Ranger, his bay horse, shuddered beneath him, ears pinned sharply forward as if warning him to turn back. But Ethan nudged the reins, jaw tightening as he scanned the dark gorge ahead. Something, or someone, was out there. A shadow flickered between jagged stones. Then came the sound he had hoped was only his imagination, a faint, broken gasp, drifting through the icy dusk like a ghost clinging to its last breath. Ethan raised his rifle, heart hammering against the silence. Whatever waited in that canyon had already met violence, and that violence might not be finished yet. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. The sun hovered low over the Chiricahua foothills, washing the rugged land in muted amber. Ethan Cole guided Ranger deeper into the canyon, each footstep crunching against loose gravel. From above, the towering cliffs cast long shadows like dark fingers reaching across the trail. The temperature fell with every breath, the air thick with the uneasy stillness that settled just before night claimed the land. Ethan wasn't a man given to superstition, but even he felt the canyon watching him. He followed the faint sound again, a strained exhale, barely audible but unmistakably human. Ethan dismounted, boots touching cold ground as he scanned the brush. He had ventured out at dawn to hunt deer, seeking solitude more than meat. These hills were the closest thing he had to peace since Emily's death. But today, silence refused to comfort him. As he rounded a boulder split by decades of storms, he saw the source of the gasp. A woman lay crumpled at the base of a fallen cedar tree, her body curled around a wound on her leg. Her clothing, leather, beads, and torn fabric, marked her as Apache. Blood darkened the dirt beneath her, soaking into her moccasins. Her long black hair tangled across her face like spilled ink. She stirred weakly when Ethan approached, eyes squinting up at him with a mix of pain and fierce distrust. The narrator, omniscient, knew the truth. She had been running for hours, chased by men who hunted not for survival but for sport. She had fought them, escaped them, bled because of them. And though she no longer heard hoofbeats, danger clung to her as surely as the dust in her hair. Ethan lowered his rifle slowly, both palms visible. "Easy," he said, voice steady, softening despite the icy knot forming in his chest. "I'm not here to hurt you." Her reply was a whisper, hoarse and trembling. "Don't come closer." He did anyway, but carefully, gently, kneeling just out of arm's reach. Her leg wound was deep, possibly caused by a blade or a rock during a fall. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. One thing was clear. If he left her here, she wouldn't survive the night. Ethan swallowed hard. "Can you hear me?" he asked. "I'm going to help." Her head lifted slightly, eyes unfocused yet still sharp with instinct. The omniscient voice revealed the struggle inside her. She wanted to trust the man kneeling before her, yet every memory of white settlers screamed caution. Still, her strength had faded too much to fight. When she whispered her name, Nalina, it was barely a breath carried off by the wind. Ethan hadn't expected her to speak at all. The name hung in the cold air, delicate but resilient, much like the woman herself. He didn't know then how deeply the sound of it would bury itself into his mind. He worked quickly, tearing linen from his saddlebag to bind her leg. She trembled as he touched her skin, her breathing shallow and fast. Pain radiated up her thigh, And beneath the physical hurt lay another wound. Fear, the kind born from being hunted. Ethan felt it like a weight in his own bones. He didn't know who had done this to her, but the signs were clear enough. Raiders, the kind who didn't leave loose ends, and if they were still hunting, they might not be far. As the omniscient narrator revealed, a set of distant tracks, faint but unmistakably fresh, cut across the canyon floor behind Ethan, leading directly toward where she had fallen. Footprints, hoofprints, the kind left by men who did not forgive witnesses nor survivors. Ethan glanced at the sky. Twilight was collapsing too fast. Staying here meant death, for both of them. He slid one arm behind Nelina's back, the other beneath her knees. She stiffened at first, gritting her teeth against the agony, but she didn't resist. When he lifted her, she felt startlingly light, like someone the world had already taken too much from. "Hold on," he murmured. "We're getting out of here." Ranger snorted nervously as Ethan approached, sensing the blood, sensing the tension in his rider's muscles. It took effort, but Ethan managed to hoist Nelina up onto the saddle, positioning her carefully so her injured leg wouldn't grind against the leather. Then he swung up behind her, one arm securing her in place, the other holding the reins. From above the canyon wall, a faint silhouette flashed, just for a heartbeat, then vanished. Someone had seen them. Ethan's pulse hammered. Night had nearly swallowed the ridge, and with darkness came danger amplified. But the ranch was still miles away. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind carried the threat of pursuit. Nelina's head rested lightly against his shoulder, as if she were slipping back into unconsciousness. Ethan tightened his grip, urging Ranger into a steady, ground-eating pace. The omniscient narrator whispered the truth Ethan could not yet know. This was not a rescue. It was the beginning of danger, of healing, and of something neither of them were prepared to admit. Behind them, deep in the canyon, another gust of wind carried the distant echo of horses, several, closing the gap with patient, predatory intent. Ethan didn't look back. He just whispered, "Stay with me, Nelina," and kicked Ranger into the gathering dark. The ranch lights appeared as a faint, flickering glow long before the house itself came into view. By then, the sky had turned a deep indigo, and the stars were beginning to pierce through the last veil of twilight. Ethan's shoulders ached from holding Nelina steady, but he didn't loosen his grip. Every jolt of Ranger's stride drew a small, muffled sound from her throat, and each sound made his jaw clench a little tighter. When they reached the edge of his property, a familiar sense of relief usually wrapped around him like a worn blanket. Tonight, that feeling didn't come. The split-rail fence, the dark outline of the barn, the single cabin standing against the gathering night, everything looked like it always had, but nothing felt the same. The omniscient eye saw it clearly. This was the first time Ethan Cole brought another beating heart, other than his horse, across that threshold since Emily died. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured to Ranger as they reached the hitching post near the porch. He slid down from the saddle, his legs stiff, then turned to ease Nelina down into his arms. She was barely conscious now, head lolling toward his shoulder as if gravity itself had grown cruel. Her skin felt hotter than it should. "That's not good," he breathed under his breath. He shouldered open the cabin door, nudging it with his boot. The familiar creak answered him, followed by the soft sigh of a place that had grown used to silence. The room smelled of old wood, cooling ashes, and faintly of lavender from a cloth Emily used to hang by the window. Ethan had left it there even after the scent had nearly faded. Tonight, though, the lavender seemed to rise up again, as if the past refused to be ignored. He carried Nelina straight to the bed against the far wall. The quilt, once bright with Emily's careful stitching, had dulled with time and disuse. For a heartbeat, Ethan hesitated, standing over the mattress. It felt like a trespass, laying another woman where his wife had once slept, where she had taken her last, shallow breath. The narrator knew what he would never say aloud. Part of him felt he was betraying a ghost. But the woman in his arms was no ghost. She was breathing, raggedly, weakly, but breathing still. Her leg wound had soaked through his makeshift bandage, and there was no more time to argue with memories. "I'm sorry, Em," he whispered so quietly only the walls heard him. "I don't have another place to put her." He lowered Nelina gently onto the bed. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open just enough to see the low ceiling, the dim lamplight, the blur of his face hovering above her. Panic rippled through her chest. She tried to push herself up, but the attempt sent a sharp streak of pain through her leg, and she collapsed back against the pillow, gasping. "Hey, hey," Ethan soothed, pulling the quilt up over her. "You're safe here. Do you understand? Safe." The word safe meant little to her now. The last time she thought she was safe, men had burst through the darkness with guns and fire. Still, the warmth of the blanket, the solidity of the mattress beneath her, the way his voice lowered as if he were talking to someone precious, something in all that made her body loosen just a fraction. The omniscient voice could see the war inside her. Distrust sharpened by experience, warring with a desperate, exhausted need to believe him. Her lips moved, cracked and dry. "This, your home?" "Yes," Ethan said. "It is." His gaze flicked around the room, suddenly seeing it as she might. The small kitchen corner with its iron stove and hanging pots. The table with 2 chairs, though only one had been used for months. The dusty shelf crowded with books Emily once loved. The cabin was simple, worn, stitched together by hard years and quiet grief. Not much, he thought. Not enough. But it was all he had. He stepped away long enough to light the lamp on the table by the bed, then moved to the stove, stirring the embers back to life. Cold water sloshed into a pot from the bucket near the door. He added what was left of his vinegar and set it to heat, hands moving on their own while his mind raced. Raiders. They had left her for dead. They might have seen the direction she crawled, the tracks she left, and if they had, the trail would lead here. He glanced back at Nelina. She lay motionless except for the rise and fall of her chest, eyes closed again. Thick, dark lashes trembled against her cheeks. She was younger than he'd first thought. Not a girl, but not so far from it either. Her braids had come undone, strands of hair clinging to her damp forehead. She looked like someone who had been fighting for too long. Ethan took a clean cloth from the shelf, a piece Emily once used as a table runner, then dipped it into the warm, spiked water. He returned to the bed and carefully peeled back the bandage around Nelina's leg. She flinched, fingers clawing at the quilt. "I know," he murmured. "I know it hurts. Just for a moment." The wound was ugly. The flesh sliced deep along the side of her thigh, edges dirty and swollen. Whatever had cut her had done so with force. He cleaned it as best he could, wiping away dried blood and grit. She bit down on her lip until he thought she might draw more blood there too. "You were running from them," the narrator reflected silently, watching through her memories. She remembered the pounding of hooves, the shouting in a language not her own, the smoke curling from burning tents. She remembered the sound of her brother falling, though she never saw where he landed. She had no room in her mind yet for this stranger's kindness, only for the certainty that being alive was something borrowed, not owed. As Ethan wound fresh strips of linen around her leg, her breath came in shallow bursts. Fever already burned beneath her skin. He could feel it even through the cloth. "We've got to keep you from infection," he said, more to himself than to her. "I'll get herbs in the morning. There's a woman in town, May. She'll know what else I can use." His own voice sounded strange in his ears. He wasn't used to talking so much. When he finished, he rinsed the cloth and folded it, then gently placed it across her forehead. She sighed as the coolness touched her skin, a tiny exhale of relief that made his chest ache. He pulled a rickety chair closer and sat beside the bed. For a long while he didn't move. The lamplight cast soft halos on the walls, painting the room with gold and shadow. Outside, the wind rustled through the sparse trees, rattling dry leaves like old bones. Ethan watched her, elbows on his knees, fingers loosely interlaced. He saw every flinch, every tremor, every furrow in her brow as fever dreams chased her. The omniscient eye saw his mind turn over the same questions again and again. Who did this to you? How long will they look? And what happens when they come to my door? He had lived a quiet life, punishing himself with solitude, telling himself that was what he deserved after failing to keep Emily alive. He hadn't invited trouble, hadn't crossed anyone. But now, trouble had ridden straight into his arms, bleeding and half-conscious. He could take her into Red Hollow in the morning, hand her over to Sheriff Hargrove. The law would keep her somewhere. Maybe safe, maybe not. Some folks in town would see her as nothing more than an Apache, nothing more than a reminder of broken treaties and blood. They wouldn't ask what had happened to her. They would ask what she might bring with her. Or he could keep her here and say nothing. That choice felt heavier. Nelina stirred again, a faint sound pressing past her lips in a language Ethan did not understand. Her hand reached out, fingers curling around empty air as if she were searching for someone who wasn't there. In her mind, she saw her father's face, his hand gripping her shoulder the last time she saw him. She heard her little brother's laughter turning to a choked cry. She remembered the smell of smoke, not from home fires, but from the destruction of everything they knew. The omniscient narrator let the emotion hover in the room like an unseen presence. Loss recognized loss. Grief recognized itself. Ethan, unable to bear watching her relive whatever horror played behind her closed eyes, reached out and lightly touched her hand. "It's all right," he said. "You're not there anymore. You're here." Her fingers tightened around his, startlingly strong for someone so weak. For just a moment, her eyes opened. They were dark and glossy, fever-bright, trying to focus on his face. "Why?" she whispered, English halting and frayed. "Why help me?" The answer rose to his lips before he had time to think. "Because someone should have helped you before," he said quietly. "And because I've already watched one person I love die in a bed I couldn't save her from. I'm not doing that again if I can help it." She didn't understand every word, but she heard the rawness underneath them. It wasn't the language that mattered, only the tone. Something inside her loosened again, as if a knot that had been tied too tight for too long had slackened by a fraction. Her eyes slid closed once more, but she didn't let go of his hand. Time passed. The lamp burned lower. Shadows deepened. Ethan eventually eased his fingers free and rose, moving stiffly to the window. He pushed the curtain aside and stared into the darkness beyond the glass. The land was quiet, but it was a deceptive kind of quiet. To the omniscient gaze, somewhere beyond the ridge, a small cluster of horsemen moved along a dry wash. Their lantern briefly shuddered to keep from drawing attention. They examined the ground, murmuring about blood trails, about the direction they'd seen someone ride. They did not know the name of Ethan Cole. Not yet. They only knew that the woman they'd left to die was no longer where they had abandoned her. Ethan could not see them. He only sensed the unease twist in his gut like a warning. He checked the rifle by the door, the pistol on the shelf, the extra shells in the box by the coat hooks. Everything was where it should be, but none of it made him feel less exposed. At last he returned to the chair and sank into it once more, dragging a blanket over his shoulders. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was restless and thin, full of half-formed dreams in which Emily's face blurred into Nelina's, and the sound of hooves thundered endlessly just beyond the edge of sight. The night wore on. Dawn would come, carrying with it new decisions and new dangers, visits from neighbors, questions from town, trails that would either be covered or followed more closely. But for this one fragile stretch of hours, the cabin held a simple, unspoken truth. A widowed cowboy and a wounded Apache woman lay under the same roof, both haunted, both hunted, both clinging to life in a place that had long forgotten how to feel like a home. Outside, the wind shifted, and somewhere in the distance a crow called once, harsh and lonely, before the world turned quiet again. Morning came slowly, like someone pulling back a heavy curtain 1 inch at a time. The first light slid under the cabin door and along the floorboards, pale and thin, reaching toward the bed where Nelina lay. The fire in the stove had collapsed into a heap of glowing embers, and the air bit with the sharp chill of an Arizona dawn in the foothills. Ethan woke in the chair with a cramp in his neck and a blanket half slid to the floor. For a few seconds, he didn't remember why his back ached or why his hand still felt the ghost of another's grip. Then the events of the previous day flooded back. Canyon shadows, blood, the ride through the dark, the fever. He turned his head. Nelina was still there, lying against the faded quilt. Her hair spread like ink across the pillow. Her brow was damp with sweat, lips slightly parted. The cloth he'd laid on her forehead had dried sometime in the night, and now lay crumpled beside her cheek. Ethan pushed himself up with a quiet groan and stepped closer. He rested the back of his hand lightly against her skin, warm but not burning as it had been. Her breathing, though shallow, was steady and even. "Still with me," he murmured. Her eyes didn't open, but the omniscient gaze saw a flicker behind her lids, a restless dream of voices and faces blurred by smoke. Somewhere inside, she was still running, still hearing hooves, still feeling the impact of falling, the way the earth rises up to meet a body that doesn't want to land. He drew in a breath and moved away, giving himself a task before the weight of memory had too much room to stretch. He stirred the fire to life, added wood, and set water to heat. The simple domestic motions steadied him. Outside, the land was already waking. A thin layer of frost kissed the edges of the grass. Ranger snorted from the small corral, stamping a hoof, impatient for feed. Ethan stepped out briefly, the cold slamming into his lungs. He tossed hay into the trough, checked the fence line with a quick sweep of his eyes, and listened. Silence. No distant shouts, no echo of gunfire, no thunder of hooves along the ridge. Just the low buzz of waking insects and the distant call of some early bird. Still, the quiet didn't reassure him the way it once had. He went back inside, closing the door with a soft thud. After a moment's hesitation, he walked to the corner cabinet and pulled out a small tin box. Inside were the things he didn't look at often anymore. A folded handkerchief embroidered with tiny forget-me-nots, a photograph fading at the edges, a ring wrapped carefully in a scrap of linen. He didn't touch the ring. Instead, he lifted the photograph. Emily's smile, caught in black and white, gazed back at him with a warmth that had once been enough to fill this whole cabin. Her hair was pinned up for church that day, her eyes soft but bright. Ethan stared at the image, feeling both the familiar ache of loss and something new, an uneasy tug in his chest as he glanced sideways at the bed. "I'm doing what you would have done," he said under his breath, as if Emily could hear him. "You wouldn't have left her there." The narrator knew he was right. Emily had been the sort of woman who would bandage a stranger's wounds without asking which side they fought on. Her faith had been stubborn like that. He put the photograph back and closed the tin. Time to face the living. When he approached the bed again, Nalina's eyes were open, watching him. They were dark and clouded with lingering fever, but there was a sharpness behind them now, a cautious, measuring intelligence. He stopped a few steps away, not wanting to startle her. "Morning," he said quietly. Her gaze flicked around the room, taking in the stove, the table, the single window where pale light now filtered through thin curtains. Then her eyes came back to his face. Her voice, when it came, was rough as gravel. "This, your woman's place," she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan's breath caught. He hadn't expected her to see that so quickly, to recognize the ghost still living in the walls. "It was," he replied after a moment. "She passed on, some time ago." The omniscient voice filled in the rest. Nearly 2 years, 2 winters, 2 springs. Long enough that the ache should have dulled more than it had. Not long enough to feel anything but disloyal when it did. Nalina studied him, reading the lines that grief carves in a person's face. She knew that look. Her own father's eyes had held the same hollow weight after her mother died. Loss different in kind, but familiar in shape. "You put me here," she said slowly, fingers brushing the quilt. "In her bed." Ethan shifted his weight. "It's the only proper bed I've got," he said. "The cot in the corner's barely fit for a tired horse, let alone someone with a wound like yours." A faint, fleeting shadow of a smile touched her mouth, there and gone like a breeze. "You care for your horse," she murmured. "I do," he admitted. "And right now, I'm trying to care for you too." She absorbed that, turning the words over inside. Care was not something she expected from a stranger, certainly not from a white man who had every reason, from his world's point of view, to leave her where he found her. "Why?" she asked again, softer this time, as if asking herself as much as him. He didn't have a simple answer, and he wasn't a man who liked talking around things. So he did what he could. He offered her water, lifting her head carefully so she could sip from the tin cup. She drank greedily, coughing a little, then sank back against the pillow, exhausted by even that small effort. "I'm going into town today," Ethan said. "You spiked a fever last night. I'll need more than vinegar and old cloth to keep you in one piece. There's a woman there, May Dawson. She knows more about herbs than most doctors around here." She frowned, familiarity and caution tightening her features at the same time. "Town," she repeated. "Many eyes." "Yeah," he said quietly. "Many eyes." He didn't add that some of those eyes watched his every move even on a good day, waiting for him to break in some obvious way. A widower who didn't drink himself blind in the saloon or throw himself into reckless fights didn't fit most folks' understanding of grief. Ethan just worked his land, kept to himself, and that kind of quiet made people uneasy. Now, if they discovered he had a wounded Apache woman sleeping in his dead wife's bed, uneasy might turn to something uglier. "I'll be careful," he told her. "I won't say anything I don't have to, but I need supplies, and you need time. That's the trade." She closed her eyes briefly, her lashes casting faint shadows on her cheeks. When she opened them again, there was a glimmer of acceptance. Not trust, not yet, but something moving in that direction. "You go," she said. Stay. I will not be seen." "You won't move off that bed if you value that leg of yours," he replied, a wryness creeping into his tone despite himself. "You try to put too much weight on it, you'll tear everything I stitched last night." Her fingers brushed the bandage under the blanket. "You sew like woman," she murmured. Ethan blinked, then let out a short, surprised huff of laughter. "That's an insult where I come from," he said. "But seeing as how Emily did most of the mending and I watched more than I sewed, I'm inclined to take that as a compliment." A silence settled between them, not quite heavy, not quite easy. The omniscient voice saw it for what it was, the fragile beginning of something that might one day resemble comfort. He left her with fresh water within reach and the lamp turned low. Before he stepped out, he paused by the door. "If anyone comes by," he said, "and I'm not here yet, you stay quiet. There's a pantry over there." He nodded toward the small door beside the stove. "If you can manage it, that's where you hide. But only if you're strong enough to move. Don't tear yourself apart for a maybe." She followed his gaze, measuring the distance, the effort it would take to cross it. Her leg throbbed just thinking about it. "I understand," she said. The narrator understood something else. She would crawl if she had to. She'd crawled before. Ethan stepped outside into the full light of morning. The sky had brightened to a hard, clear blue, the kind that made every shadow sharper. He saddled Ranger again, checking cinches and straps twice instead of once. As he was looping the reins, he heard hoofbeats approach along the main track. He tensed. A rider emerged over the low rise, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low, coat flapping behind him. Ben Turner. Ethan recognized him by the battered hat and the way he sat his horse. Comfortable, like a man who'd spent more of his life in a saddle than a chair. "Morning, Cole," Ben called, raising a hand. "Thought I'd find you still snoring." Ethan forced his shoulders to loosen. "Haven't slept that late since I was 12, he replied, as Ben reined in near the corral. "What brings you this way?" Ben snorted. "Fence on the north side of my spread took a beating in that wind last week. Figured I'd see if you had any extra posts you could spare, or if you're still stingy as an old mule." "Got a few," Ethan said. "We can haul some over this afternoon. I was just heading into town." Ben's gaze slid casually past Ethan toward the cabin. It lingered there a heartbeat too long. "You got company?" he asked. The question was light in tone, but not in intent. The omniscient eye saw Ethan's jaw tighten, saw the calculations flash through his mind. Too much hesitation would invite suspicion. Too quick an answer would do the same. "Only the kind that squeaks when the floorboards get cold," Ethan said. "Mice don't pay rent, but they stick around anyhow." Ben's mouth twitched. "You always were funnier when you didn't mean to be." He turned in his saddle a bit, still looking at the house. Thought I saw light there late last night when I turned in. Figured maybe you took up reading scripture at odd hours or something. Couldn't sleep. Ethan lied easily. That much at least was true. Fire puts up quite a show once you get it going. Ben looked back at him, eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing the truth of that answer. The man had seen enough in his lifetime to know when something was off, but he also had his own worries. A broken fence, a stubborn herd, a back that ached more every winter. Well, he said at last, if you're going to town, keep an ear open. Heard Sheriff Hargrove found sign of raiders up near the old wagon road. They're sniffing around too close for my liking. Ethan's stomach tightened. Raider sign? He repeated. Tracks, ashes from a fresh camp, couple carcasses left to rot. Ben spit to the side. Not the Apache kind, neither. The roaming kind. Men with no flag but their own greed. His eyes flicked to the cabin one more time, then back to Ethan. You see anything strange up in those hills you haunt, you let someone know. Last thing we need is trouble riding right past your place into ours. Ethan met his gaze evenly. If I see trouble, I'll deal with it, he said. Same as always. Ben grunted, apparently satisfied, for now. I'll hold you to those posts later, Cole. Don't go disappearing into some bottle in town. Not my habit, Ethan said. Ben tipped his hat and turned his horse, trotting back the way he'd come. Ethan watched him go until the dust settled and the sound of hoofbeats faded. Only then did he exhale slowly and rub a hand over his face. The narrator, all-seeing, knew this was just the first ripple. Ben had noticed the lamp, the change in routine. Others would notice too. Secrets didn't stay buried long in a place as small and watchful as Red Hollow. Inside the cabin, Nelina hadn't heard the words, but she had felt the tension. Her senses, sharpened by years of needing to listen for danger, caught the way the horse had approached, the tone of voices outside. She stared at the pantry door, measuring again, then at her wrapped leg. If I stay, she thought, I bring danger. If I go, I bring death. The choice would not be hers alone. Ethan swung onto Ranger, mind already racing ahead to the general store, to May Dawson's kind eyes, to Sheriff Hargrove's questions. He clicked his tongue and set off down the trail toward town, the ranch shrinking behind him. Chapter 4 waited in Red Hollow, with rumors, with law, with the first threads of a world that would not let his decision remain simple for long. Red Hollow always looked smaller the closer Ethan rode to it. From a distance, the town seemed almost respectable. A cluster of buildings huddled against the horizon, smoke rising thin and straight from chimneys, a church steeple just visible past the rooftops. But as he crossed the dry creek bed and followed the rutted road in, the truth showed itself. Peeling paint, sagging porches, windows clouded with dust and old worry. Ranger slowed as they passed the first hitching posts, instinctively easing into the pace of a place where time moved in fits and starts. A few men leaned against the front of the saloon, half awake, half drunk, watching Ethan the way they watched anyone who didn't spend his evenings at their card tables. A dog trotted across the street, nose to the ground, tail twitching. The omniscient gaze saw Ethan's shoulders stiffen just slightly, the only sign that riding into town made him feel like a man stepping into a room where everyone had been talking about him 5 minutes earlier. He dismounted in front of Dawson's general store, patting Ranger's neck before looping the reins around the post. Won't be long, he murmured. He pushed open the door. A bell above it gave a thin, weary jingle. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of coffee beans, leather oil, and old wood. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with everything from bolts of cloth to boxes of ammunition. Behind the counter stood May Dawson, Aunt May to most folks, her gray hair neatly pinned, apron already dusted with flour and sugar from the morning's baking. She looked up over a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles. "Well, I'll be," she said. "Ethan Cole up before noon and in my store. That's 2 signs of the world ending." He huffed out a breath that might have been a laugh. "Morning, May." She watched him more closely than her tone suggested, seeing the tightness around his eyes, the way his hand stayed near his belt even when there was no cause for it. "What do you need?" she asked, softer now. "Bandages," he said. "More than usual. Vinegar if you've got it. Maybe some of that salve you keep for burns and such." "Burns," she repeated slowly. "You planning on falling into your own stove?" "Something like that," he said. Aunt May didn't push. She turned, moving with surprising quickness for a woman her age, pulling supplies from her shelves and placing them on the counter. As she worked, she spoke over her shoulder. "Heard Sheriff Hargrove talking earlier," she said. "Said someone's been stirring up trouble along the north roads. Raiders. Ugly business." "Ben Turner mentioned it," Ethan replied. She nodded, setting a small tin down with a quiet thump. "They like to pick at wounds that never quite healed," she murmured. "Old grudges, old fears. People do foolish things when they're scared." He knew she wasn't just talking about raiders. The bell above the door jingled again, and a new voice broke the moment. "Well now, if it isn't the quietest man in 3 counties," someone drawled. "I thought you only came into town when the moon turned blue." Ethan didn't have to turn to know who it was. The easy humor in the voice gave it away. "Morning, Mateo," he said. Mateo Ruiz strode in, brushing dust from his coat, dark eyes bright with a kind of restless energy that never quite settled. He tipped his hat at May, who swatted playfully at his arm. "You tracking me now?" Ethan asked. "Hard to track a shadow," Mateo replied. "But I figured if there was talk of raiders and trouble, you'd either be out there in the middle of it or in here pretending you weren't." He leaned against the counter, eyeing the pile of bandages and bottles. "Looks like I guessed right." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Fence wire bit me," he said. "Got tired of bleeding on the dirt." "Uh-huh," Mateo said, unconvinced. The omniscient narrator could hear the skepticism ticking in his mind like a clock. He'd ridden enough trails with Ethan to know when the man was hiding something. There was a heavy tread on the porch outside. The bell jingled a 3rd time. Sheriff Luke Hargrove stepped in, bringing a slice of harsh daylight with him before the door swung shut. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, his badge dull but visible on his vest. His eyes, pale and steady, swept the room in a quick, practiced scan. "Morning, May," he said. "Sheriff," she replied. "You buying or just looming?" "Little of both," he said. Then his gaze landed on Ethan. "Cole." "Sheriff?" Luke's gaze ticked over the bandages on the counter, the extra bottles, the way Ethan stood just slightly turned as if shielding the supplies from view. "Anias, you patching up half your herd?" he asked. Ethan shrugged. "Figured I should be prepared. Heard talk of raiders. Makes a man think on precautions." Luke studied him, the silence stretching. The omniscient voice knew the sheriff was weighing several things at once. Ethan's general honesty, his habit of keeping to himself, the fact that he'd been seen riding into the hills more often than usual. "Saw fresh tracks near Dry Creek," Luke said. "Not Apache sign, boot prints, horses shod, matches what we found near the wagon road. You see anything up that way yesterday?" "No," Ethan answered. That part, at least, wasn't a lie. By the time he'd found Nalina, the raiders had already passed through. Luke's stare lingered. You hear anything? Ethan's mind flickered with images. The gasp in the canyon, the blood on stone, Nalina's whispered name. Just wind, he said. You know how it howls through those rocks. Mateo's gaze bounced between them, tension prickling under his skin. He could tell there was more unsaid than said, but he also knew forcing the issue here, with the sheriff, wasn't smart. After a beat, Luke nodded once. You hear or see anything that doesn't fit? You let me know, he said. These men aren't the kind that stop at one camp. They're the keep going until someone makes them kind. I'll keep that in mind, Ethan replied. Luke turned to May, ordered coffee and a sack of flour, then drifted toward the newspaper tacked to the wall, his eyes flicking over headlines that didn't change much. Droughts, disputes, distant wars that felt unreal out here. Aunt May quietly totaled up Ethan's supplies and leaned in as she handed him the bundle. You got someone hurt, she said in a low voice. It wasn't a question. Ethan met her eyes. There was no judgment there, only concern, threaded with the kind of knowing that came from having lived long enough to see the same stories repeat in different faces. Yes, he said simply. Then you take this too. She added a small pouch of herbs. Boil it into tea. It'll help with fever and pain. Don't argue, Ethan Cole. I've been bossing you around since you were tall enough to reach my counter. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. Mateo straightened away from the counter. You're riding back now? He asked. Soon as I settle up, Ethan said. Good, Mateo replied easily. Because I'm coming with you. Ethan frowned. You don't even know where I'm going. Mateo tilted his head. Your place, unless you suddenly decided to take up residence in Ben Turner's barn. I was going to come by later anyway. Might as well save my horse some miles. The omniscient eye saw Ethan hesitate. Bringing Mateo back meant bringing another set of eyes and questions into his home. But it also meant another gun if raiders came calling, another body between the cabin and whatever trouble tracked Nalina. You're not staying out of this, are you? Ethan said. Not a chance, Mateo answered. Some of us like you, Cole, even if you make it difficult. Luke glanced back at them, suspicion flickering. You two planning something I should know about? He asked. Planning to fix fences, Mateo said smoothly. And maybe get this man to say more than 10 words in a row. Call it a charity project. Aunt May snorted. If you manage that, I'll bake you a whole pie. Luke shook his head, lips twitching. Just stay out of trouble, he said. We've got enough of that coming from the outside. Ethan settled his bill, gathered the bundle of supplies, and pushed through the door into the sharp midday light. Mateo fell into step beside him. Once they were out of earshot, Mateo said quietly, You're not telling him everything. No, Ethan replied. You going to tell me? Mateo asked. Ethan paused by Ranger, looking toward the horizon where the land rolled away in scrub and rock and endless sky. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders, he answered, When we get there. The omniscient narrator knew that those 4 words marked a turning point. Ethan was about to let someone else step into the circle of his secret. It would bring help. It would also bring complication. They mounted up and rode out of Red Hollow, leaving behind watchful eyes and unasked questions. Ahead lay the ranch, a wounded Apache woman in a dead woman's bed, and a future that would refuse to stay quiet. Chapter 5. weighted with first conversations shared around a fire, with Mateo's easy charm trying to bridge a lifetime of mistrust, and with the fragile beginnings of trust that would be tested by flames and gunfire before long. Dust chased their horses long after Red Hollow shrank to a brown smear on the horizon. The sun leaned west, throwing long shadows over scrub and dry creek beds. Ethan rode in silence, scanning every ridge and wash for movement that didn't belong. Beside him, Mateo rode loose in the saddle, hat low, watching him from the corner of his eye. "You're wound tight as barbed wire," Mateo said at last. "Any tighter and Ranger'll buck you off just to get some peace." Ethan's fingers flexed on the reins. "There's reason," he said. "You wanted the truth. You'll get it at the ranch. Not out here where anybody riding by can listen." Mateo let it drop, but the question stayed with him. He had seen Ethan wary before, but this felt different, like a man bracing for a storm he knew was already on its way. They crested the last rise. Ethan's small ranch lay below. The cabin and barn dug into the land like they meant to stay. A skinny line of smoke climbed from the chimney. The fence stood, the yard was clear, the front door closed. From a distance, everything looked the same. Inside, everything had changed. On the bed, Nalina felt the faint tremor through the floorboards before she heard the hooves. She pushed herself higher against the headboard, breath hissing as pain shot through her leg. One hand pressed over the bandage, the other gripped the edge of the mattress. If she had to crawl, she would crawl. The latch turned. Ethan stepped in first, shoulders filling the doorway. For a heartbeat, fear slammed into her chest. Had he brought the men with guns and fire? But the second man who followed wore trail dust and a crooked half-smile, not the hard grin of a raider. Mateo stopped short when he saw her. "Well," he said quietly, the joke dying in his throat. "Fence did more than bite you." Ethan set his bundle of supplies on the table. There was no hiding now. "This is Nalina," he said. "Found her in the canyon. Raiders hit her people and left her bleeding on the rocks." Nalina's gaze flicked between them, reading tone and posture more than words. She knew the feeling of being talked around, as if pain turned you into an object instead of a person. "I still hear," she rasped, lifting her chin. "Do not talk like I am ghost." Mateo blinked, then let out a small, honest chuckle. "Fair enough," he said, slowing his speech. "Name's Mateo Ruiz, friend of Ethan's. I annoy him, but I'm useful sometimes." "You make much noise," she said. "Only when nervous," he replied, "or hungry." The edge in the room eased a little. Ethan watched them, a flicker of gratitude moving over his tired features. He'd never been good at making strangers feel less like strangers. He crossed to the bed and carefully peeled back the bandage. The cloth was stained, but there was no fresh bleed. "Fever's down some," he murmured. "May Dawson sent herbs. I'll boil them into tea. It'll taste awful, but it should help." "Bad medicine usually works best," Mateo said. "That's what my mama swore." "May knows someone's hurt?" he added. "She knows enough," Ethan replied. He didn't say how May had looked at him, sharp, knowing, nor how the sheriff's questions and Ben Turner's visit still scraped at the back of his mind. Mateo moved to the corner of the table, careful not to loom over the bed. "Those raiders?" he asked gently. "Think they followed you?" Nalina's mouth tightened. Memory rose like smoke. Tents ripped open, fire jumping from skin to canvas. The man with the jagged scar along his jaw shouting that no one should be spared. She heard hooves thundering, a child crying, a voice cut off mid-word. "They do not like to leave what they break," she said. "They like to see all burn. Maybe they think I lie with the dead." Maybe they remember, I do not. Ben said the sheriff found sign near the old wagon road. Ethan muttered. If they're circling, this place sits right in their path. And an Apache woman under your roof, Mateo added quietly, is a lantern to men like that, and a problem for men here who scare easy. He looked at Nalina. If you want, I can ride tonight, see if they're close. Ethan shook his head. Not alone. Not yet. We brace what we can first. If they come, we need these walls to hold long enough to fight or run. He didn't say what his math looked like. 3 people against however many rode with that scarred man. Nalina turned her eyes toward the small window. The sky outside was wide and bright and offered nowhere to hide. I bring danger, she said slowly. If I leave, danger follows me away from here. If you leave like you are now, Ethan said, you won't get far. Out there, they'll find you easier than here. She studied him, searching his face for mockery and finding none. What if your people turn on you because of me? She asked. What if they do as raiders do, but with law words and different faces? He thought of Ben's narrowed stare, Luke Hargrove's careful eyes, and the way some men in town spat the word Apache like it tasted bitter. Some won't like it, he admitted. Some will call it foolish. But this is my land. Under this roof, I answer to my own conscience first. Mateo blew out a slow breath. Then we make this roof worth defending, he said. Show me your extra boards and any nails that still remember how to work. We'll tighten shutters, fix that back door before it tattles. Ethan nodded, grateful for work his hands could understand. He gestured toward the lean-to, and the 2 men stepped out into the late light. Silence settled for a moment behind them. Nalina stared at the rough beams overhead. Her thoughts circled a fragile idea, safety that did not require her to vanish or bow. She had never seen such a thing last. Outside, as afternoon thinned toward evening, the first hammer blows rang against wood, sharp and steady. Far beyond the ridge, a thin dust line lifted where riders moved at an easy lope, too distant for eyes at the ranch, close enough that tomorrow their echo would carry all the way to Ethan's door. Chapter 6 waited with knocks from men who claimed to keep order, and the quieter approach of others who lived by breaking it. By late afternoon, the ranch had taken on a new stillness, one too deliberate to be natural. Mateo and Ethan had reinforced the back door, hammered new nails into loose shutters, and braced the corral gate until it held firm. But the more they worked, the clearer it became that wood and iron alone would not be enough if trouble arrived with guns and cruelty. Inside the cabin, the shadows lengthened. Nalina sat propped against the headboard, her dark hair falling over one shoulder as she watched the light shift across the room. Her leg throbbed steadily, but she had learned long ago how to breathe through pain. What unsettled her more was the unfamiliar quiet, the sense that the air itself was preparing for something she could not yet see. Ethan stepped back inside carrying the last bucket of water from the well. Dust streaked his shirt, and his jaw was locked in a way that told her he was fighting thoughts he wasn't ready to name. Mateo followed a moment later, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. That's the last of the fortifying, Mateo announced. If someone sneezes on that back door, it might hold. Might. Ethan shot him a look, but Mateo only grinned faintly, trying to lighten an atmosphere that refused to lift. You 2 work hard, Nalina said, her voice quieter than usual. For me. For all of us, Ethan corrected as he set the bucket near the stove. If raiders come, they won't ask who belongs here and who doesn't. They'll burn everything that stands still. Matteo nodded. He's right. Men like that don't draw lines. They erase them. Nalina absorbed the words, her gaze drifting to the window. Beyond the glass lay open land stretching toward distant ridges. Land she'd once crossed with ease alongside her people. Land where a person could move freely. Now it looked like a sweeping stage where danger might ride in from any direction. She turned back to Ethan. You should not risk your life for mine. Ethan met her eyes steadily. I already did, and I'd do it again. That's not changing. Something in his voice, firm but gentle, made Matteo glance between them. A moment hung there, unspoken but heavy, before the cowboy turned away and reached for the herb pouch May had given him. I'll make the tea, he said, distracted. You need it before that fever thinks about coming back. Matteo cleared his throat. While you do that, I'll check the ridge again. Just a quick sweep. Ethan stiffened. Don't go far. Just far enough, Matteo replied with a small nod. If anyone's coming, better to know before they knock. He slipped outside, gentle with the door latch to avoid startling Nalina. The omniscient eye watched him mount his horse and ride toward the highest point overlooking the valley, a dark figure against the reddening sky. Inside the cabin, the kettle began to hum. Ethan crushed the herbs between his fingers, releasing their sharp, earthy scent. When the water boiled, he poured it carefully into a tin cup and carried it to the bed. It's bitter, he warned, but May knows her remedies. Nalina accepted the cup with both hands. Her fingers brushed his, not by accident, but by necessity. Her grip wasn't steady. Ethan felt the warmth of her skin and held the cup until she could take it fully. She drank slowly, wincing at the taste. You speak gently, she said after a moment, like someone who learned from love. He froze, the words striking deeper than she knew. Emily's laughter echoed unbidden in his memory, soft and bright. The ache that followed was familiar, but something new threaded through it now, something like guilt tangled with gratitude. Emily was gentle, he said finally. She saw the world the way it should be, not the way it is. And now? Nalina asked. Ethan looked at her. Really looked. At the strength beneath her exhaustion. The fire that had not gone out even after all she'd endured. Now, he said slowly. I'm trying to see again. Before she could respond, Ranger whinnied sharply outside. Hooves clattered over hard earth. A heartbeat later, Matteo burst through the door, his breath fast, eyes fierce. They're out there, he said. 3 riders. Too far to see faces, but their pattern's wrong. They're searching. Ethan's stomach tightened. How close? Maybe half a mile in closing. They're sweeping the ridge like they're following a trail. Nalina's grip tightened on the blanket. They know I live. Matteo shook his head. Not yet. But they know someone helped you. And if they keep tracking, they'll reach this place before the sun's gone. Ethan reached for his rifle. The weight of it settled into his hands like a familiar promise. We hold them at the line, he said. They come too close. We make sure they don't ride back to tell the others. Matteo pulled his pistol, checking the chamber. I can take the edge of the yard. You hold the porch. Nalina pushed herself upright, pain flashing across her face. I can fight. Ethan stepped forward immediately. Absolutely not. You can't even stand. Her eyes burned. My people died. I should stand for them. You will, he said softly. Just not tonight. Not like this. Her breath trembled, but she nodded. Outside, the last light faded. The air thinned and stilled. On the ridge, faint moving shapes grew larger. 3 figures on horseback, riding slow and deliberate. They would not be the last. And Chapter 7 would begin at the moment those riders crossed the final stretch of open ground, bringing danger straight to the cabin door. The world seemed to shrink to the size of the ranch yard as the 3 riders crested the ridge and began their slow descent toward the cabin. Dusk gathered behind them like a second shadow, stretching long across the valley floor. Their silhouettes moved with predatory patience, men who knew they were hunting something wounded, something vulnerable, something they believed belonged to them. Ethan stepped onto the porch the moment their shapes sharpened. He carried his rifle low but ready, the barrel angled slightly toward the dirt. Mateo stood a few feet to the side, half shielded by the corner post, pistol hidden against his thigh so he wouldn't show threat before he needed to. The air between them pulsed with tension. Inside the cabin, Nalina struggled to sit upright. She leaned forward, bracing against the windowsill, watching through a narrow opening between the curtains. Her heartbeat thudded painfully in her wounded leg, in her throat, in her ears. She recognized the way the riders moved, their loose seats, their easy handling of the reins. Raiders always rode like men who expected a fight but didn't fear one. The wind carried faint voices, laughter, a slow, ugly whistle. "They're too calm," Mateo muttered. "Men looking for trouble don't smile like that unless they think they already found it." "They'll test us first," Ethan said. "See how the land lies, see what we do. Then we don't blink." The riders finally reached the yard, stopping about 20 yards from the porch. The lead man nudged his horse forward slightly. He was broad-shouldered, unshaven, with a jagged scar running from his jaw to his ear, deep, puckered, unmistakable. Nalina's breath stopped when she saw him. The memory of him shouting orders, dragging her cousin by the hair, kicking burning embers into her father's face. Those images slammed into her like a blow. "That one," she whispered. "He hurt my family." On the porch, Ethan called out, voice steady. "Evenin'." The scarred man grinned. "Evenin', friend. Didn't expect company this far out. You live alone?" "Mostly," Ethan said. The raider's eyes swept the yard, noting the newly reinforced door, the tightened shutters, the way Ranger stood saddled and tied, as if prepared for a quick ride. He noticed the fresh hammer marks, shiny and unweathered. His grin widened. "You look like a man expecting guests," the raider said. "Funny thing, we're looking for someone. Girl from the canyon. Hurt bad. Crawled off before we finished our business with her." He leaned forward in his saddle, voice lowering. "You see a woman anywhere near here? Apache. Maybe bleeding, maybe begging?" Mateo's hand twitched near his pistol. Ethan didn't move. "Haven't seen anyone fitting that." The raider chuckled, slow and mocking. "See, I don't believe you." He tilted his head. "Not your fault. You don't lie enough to be good at it." One of the other riders shifted his weight. "Boss, just let me check the barn. If she's not here—" "No," the scarred man said sharply. "We do things proper." He turned back to Ethan. "Why don't we take a look inside your cabin, just to ease my mind?" Ethan raised his rifle halfway. "Nobody's going inside my home." The yard fell still. A hawk cried somewhere overhead. Dust drifted past the hooves of the raiders' horses. The scarred man's grin faded, replaced by a thin line of annoyance. That sounded like a no. "It was," Ethan replied. Mateo stepped forward just enough to be seen, pistol now visible. "3 of you," he said lightly. "2 of us. Odds look fair to me." One raider spat into the dirt. "You want to die over some squaw?" Ethan's jaw clenched. I want to protect what's mine." "Then you should have chained your doors better," the scarred man snarled. His hand dropped toward his holster. Ethan fired first. The shot cracked through the valley, a single rifle blast that echoed off stone and brush. The bullet struck the raider's hat, ripping through the brim and sending it spinning into the dirt. The man jerked sideways in shock, nearly falling off his horse. Ethan didn't miss on accident. "That was your warning," Ethan said, voice cold. "Next one won't be." The raiders froze, startled by the cowboy's precision. For the first time, their confidence wavered. Inside the cabin, Nalina swallowed hard. Her hands trembled. She wanted to stand, to fight, to do something. But her leg throbbed, a brutal reminder of her limits. Outside, Mateo stepped fully into the open. "You heard the man," he said. "Turn your horses around." The scarred raider glared, fury tightening his face. "You're making a mistake, friend." Mateo shrugged. "Wouldn't be my first, won't be my last." One of the other raiders shifted nervously. "Boss, maybe later, when it's dark." "Shut up," the scarred man snapped. But he was thinking the same thing. The porch light made Ethan and Mateo too easy to track. Coming back at night, coming back in numbers, that was smarter. The scarred man spat in the dirt. "Next time we come, we won't be talking." Ethan raised his rifle a fraction. "I'll be waiting." The raiders finally wheeled their horses around. Dust billowed as they galloped back toward the ridge, disappearing into the deepening dusk. Silence followed. Deep, thick, heavy. Mateo exhaled shakily. "Well," he muttered, "that went better than I thought." Ethan didn't smile. He stared at the ridge long after the raiders were gone. "They'll be back," he said, "with more men." Inside the cabin, Nalina pressed a hand to the window frame, her breath unsteady. She had known they would come. She had known danger followed her like a shadow, but she had not expected a man to stand in front of his home and fire a warning shot for her. When Ethan and Mateo stepped inside, she looked at them both with a mixture of fear and something softer, something like gratitude sharpened by disbelief. "You protect me," she whispered. "Even when danger walks to your door." Ethan set his rifle aside. "That wasn't about you. That was about right and wrong." Mateo added, "And about not letting men like that think they own the world." Nalina lowered her gaze, voice trembling. "They will come back. With fire. With death." Ethan nodded. "Then we prepare." Mateo drew in a breath. "We need more guns, more hands, and someone who can get the sheriff on our side without telling him too much." Ethan looked toward the town, toward Aunt May, toward allies he wasn't sure he could trust, toward enemies who might wear badges instead of scars. "We're not running," he said. "Not tonight, not tomorrow." Nalina's eyes softened. "Then I will stand with you, when I can stand." The narrator saw it clearly. Trust was beginning to take shape, not born of comfort, but of shared danger. Night settled over the ranch as Chapter 7 closed, carrying with it the promise of a confrontation no one would walk away from unchanged. Chapter 8 would begin with a journey back to town, and a truth Ethan could no longer avoid. Morning broke sharp and pale, the kind of light that didn't warm so much as reveal. Ethan had slept little, ears tuned to every shifting sound outside the cabin. Mateo had taken turns watching the yard from the porch, leaning against a post with his pistol resting across his lap. Neither man spoke of the fear that curled low in their stomachs, but both felt it. Inside, Nalina dozed fitfully, her body weakened by pain, but her spirit coiled tight like a bowstring. She kept waking at the faintest noise, expecting fire, expecting shouts, expecting the scarred man's voice tearing through the silence. Each time she blinked awake, she found the cabin intact and the two cowboys still standing guard. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, Ethan had made a decision. "We ride into town," he said as Mateo poured water into a tin cup. "We need help, supplies, and maybe a plan that doesn't involve dying on this porch." Mateo nodded. "Sheriff won't be thrilled to know we pointed guns at visitors." "He'll be less thrilled when those visitors start burning ranches," Ethan replied. Nelena pushed herself upright, breath shaky. "I go too." "No," Ethan said immediately. "You can't travel like this." "I cannot stay," she argued. "If they return and you not here." Mateo held up a hand. "We're not leaving you alone. I'll stay." Ethan goes. The room stilled. Nelena studied Mateo, searching his expression for anything false. She found none. His posture wasn't boastful. It was steady, honest. A man ready to fight, even if alone. "You trust him," she said to Ethan. "With my life," Ethan replied. Mateo smirked, and sometimes his horse. For the first time since the raiders had appeared, a faint shadow of amusement crossed Nelena's face. "Then I stay," she said. Ethan knelt beside her. "We'll be back before sundown. Keep quiet, keep low. And if you hear anything that sounds wrong, hide in the pantry. That leg can't take a fight." She swallowed, the movement tight. "I understand." He hesitated, not because of doubt, but because of something gentler, something he didn't yet know how to name. Then he stood, grabbing his hat and rifle. Mateo met him at the door. "Keep your words clean and your temper cleaner," he said. "Town's twitchy right now." Ethan almost smiled. "I know." "Good. Because if you start a fistfight with the sheriff, I'm not riding out to rescue you." Ethan stepped onto the porch, the early light sharpening his silhouette against the land. Ranger snorted as Ethan approached, sensing tension through the reins. Inside, Nelena watched him go. She didn't want to, but she memorized the sight anyway. Broad shoulders, steady posture, a man walking toward danger because he believed it was the right thing. It felt like a memory she might need later, one she feared could become the last she'd see of him. Mateo closed the door softly and turned toward her. "Don't worry," he said. "He's stubborn, but he's smart." "He is both," she agreed quietly. "But raiders are more stubborn and more cruel." Mateo's expression hardened. "Then they'll meet someone who's both in return." She leaned her head back, watching him as he moved about the small cabin, checking shutters and window latches again. He had the kind of confidence that came from experience, but beneath it she sensed nerves too. Men who weren't afraid were usually fools. Through the window, they could see Ethan riding away, dust rising behind him as Ranger carried him toward Red Hollow. The omniscient eye saw the tension inside Nelena coil tighter. She forced herself to breathe slowly, but her chest still felt heavy. Mateo noticed. "You all right?" he asked gently. "Pain comes and goes," she said. "Fear stays." He nodded. "Fear's just proof you care what happens next." She blinked at that, an idea she hadn't heard before. "And what if what comes next is death?" she asked. Mateo shrugged, a quiet resolve settling into his features. "Then we fight like hell to push it further down the road." Their conversation faded into a silence broken only by the crackle of the stove. For a long stretch, Nelena watched the patterns of light on the wooden floor, each shifting line reminding her how close danger still lingered. Outside, the wind shifted. A gust rattled the edge of the cabin roof. Mateo's hand moved to his holster instinctively, though no riders appeared on the ridge. "Rest," he said softly, catching the strain in her voice. "You need strength when the time comes." She wanted to tell him she didn't know if she had any left, but she simply nodded and let her eyes slide shut. Mateo sat in the chair nearest the door, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. His eyes scanned the yard with unwavering focus. Every sound, every rustle of brush, every groan from the wood, kept him poised. Hours passed like that. The cabin held its breath, and the distance between Ethan and danger shrank with every mile. By midday, Nalina stirred again. She shifted slightly, testing her leg. Pain flared bright and hot, and she hissed despite herself. Mateo was at her side in a heartbeat. "Easy, don't tear that wound open." She gritted her teeth. "I want to stand again. I want to fight." "You will," he said. "But first you have to heal. There's a right order to things." She opened her mouth to argue, but the sound of distant hooves silenced both of them. Mateo's face sharpened instantly. He stepped to the window, peering through the thin slit between curtains. One rider, one horse, moving fast. But the shape wasn't Raiders. It was Ethan. Nalina's breath released in a shudder. Mateo exhaled too, though he'd never admit it. "Looks like your cowboy didn't pick a fight with the sheriff after all." When Ethan reached the yard, Ranger was slick with sweat. Ethan swung down before the horse even stopped. He ran for the porch. Mateo threw open the door just as Ethan stepped inside. Dust streaked across his face, breath fast. "They're not stopping," Ethan said. "Sheriff Hargrove says the Raiders hit another camp. They're sweeping south now." Nalina straightened instinctively. "Here." Ethan nodded grimly. "They'll reach us by tomorrow." Mateo clenched his jaw. "Then Chapter 9 is going to be hell." Ethan's eyes darkened. "We prepare tonight." And the cabin, once only a shelter, became their last stand. Night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket, thick with the scent of dry earth and distant smoke. Ethan moved through the cabin with controlled urgency, placing rifles near the windows, checking ammunition, and reinforcing the shutters one last time. Mateo mirrored him, quieter now, the usual humor drained from his face. Outside, Ranger pawed the ground uneasily, sensing what was coming. Inside, Nalina sat upright despite the pain pulsing in her leg. She watched the two men prepare for a battle she believed she had brought to their doorstep. Guilt pressed hard on her chest. "You should send me away," she said when Ethan passed near the bed. "Raiders want me, not your home." Ethan shook his head. "They want destruction. You leaving won't stop that." Mateo added, "Besides, you wouldn't make it 10 yards on that leg. They'd find you by sundown." Nalina knew they were right, but fear still twisted inside her. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "My father used to say that courage is not strength. It is choosing to stand while shaking." Ethan slowed, meeting her gaze. "Then we'll shake together." The words steadied her more than medicine ever could. As dawn approached, the ground began to tremble, faint at first, then unmistakable. Hoofbeats, many of them. Mateo positioned himself near the back window. Ethan took the porch, rifle cradled in his hands. Nalina forced herself upright, gripping the edge of the nightstand. Pain tore through her thigh, but she refused to lie helpless while others fought for her life. Through the window, she saw them. Riders emerging over the ridge like a dark tide. The scarred leader rode in front, eyes fixed on the cabin with a hunger that made her blood run cold. He shouted something, and the raiders fanned out. Ethan fired first, dropping the man closest to the barn. Mateo fired second, hitting a rider trying to circle to the right. Gunfire exploded across the valley, echoing like thunder. Nelina's pulse slammed in her ears. The fear she had carried for days snapped into something sharper, anger, fierce and bright. She reached for the pistol Ethan had left on the table. Her hands shook violently, but she steadied her breathing the way her father had taught her. "Aim for truth," he used to say. "Not for death. Truth finds its mark." On the porch, Ethan's rifle clicked empty. He ducked behind a post, reaching for more shells. A bullet splintered the wood inches from his head. Then, through the smoke, the scarred leader charged straight toward the porch. Ethan lifted his rifle, but knew he wouldn't reload in time. Inside, Nelina exhaled, lined up her shot through the small crack in the shutters, and fired. The scarred man jerked, falling sideways off his horse. Gunfire faltered. Mateo shouted, "They're pulling back!" The raiders, suddenly leaderless and stunned, wheeled their horses around and retreated toward the ridge, vanishing into the dust. Silence settled, raw, shaken, unbelievable. Ethan ran inside. "Nelina, did you—" Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. "I told you," she whispered. "I will stand with you." The sun rose slowly, as if unsure it was welcome after a night filled with smoke and gunfire. The ranch yard was torn, marked by hoofprints and broken earth, but it still stood. The cabin still stood, and all three inside were alive. Ethan finished checking the perimeter and returned to the porch where Mateo leaned against a post, arms crossed. "They won't be back," Mateo said quietly. "Not without their leader. Raiders like that scatter when the head falls." Ethan nodded, though he kept scanning the horizon. Habit was hard to break. Inside, Nelina sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion softening her posture, but a quiet pride shining through her eyes. When Ethan entered, she looked up, searching his face for unspoken truths. "Your leg needs rest," Ethan said gently. "But you saved my life." "You saved mine first," she replied. Mateo stepped in with a grin. "And you saved mine by not letting this fool get shot in the head." For the first time, laughter, small but real, broke the heaviness between them. As hours passed, the weight of fear lifted, replaced by something steady and warm. Ethan prepared a small meal, and the three of them shared it together. The simplicity of it, three survivors eating after surviving death, felt sacred. Later, when Mateo saddled his horse to ride into town and inform the sheriff, he paused at the porch. "You two take care of each other," he said. "The world's not kind, but sometimes people can be." When he left, Ethan returned to the cabin, where Nelina watched the light play across the wooden floor. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "Your world and mine, they are far apart." Ethan stepped closer. "Maybe, but you're here now, and this ranch, it hasn't felt like a home in a long time. Not until you walked through that door, bleeding, stubborn, and alive." She lowered her gaze. "I did not mean to take the place of your wife." "You didn't," he said. "No one can. But grief isn't a room meant to stay empty forever." Her breath trembled. "What happens now?" Ethan offered his hand. "Now," he said, "you heal. And when you can walk again, you choose. Stay here, or ride wherever you need. Either way, you won't face the world alone." She looked at his hand for a long moment, then placed hers in his. Outside, the wind swept gently across the valley, carrying away the last traces of smoke. The land stood scarred but alive, just like them. And for the first time in a long time, the cabin held not only survival, but hope. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.